Hello Hibiscus, welcome to the latest episode of Cosmic Jar. Now I am filming this shortly after eclipse season has ended, and I think it's very fair to say none of us are feeling particularly sexy or thrilled with ourselves, right? We are existing and trying to thrive in a Saturn-ruled year. And after the last few weeks, I know many of us have faced probably very uncomfortable insights as to where we are letting ourselves down, where our lack of discipline and accountability has led us into very regrettable circumstances, environments, or having to face that we made decisions that perhaps were not the best or in our best interest. It's not it doesn't go over my head that by the time many of you are watching this, there is a deep sense of I wish I had done some stuff differently in the past, right? It's not easy to sit with reflections, and obviously we're in a Saturn retrograde, so there's a lot of consequences that are currently being dished out about, damn, had I only paid more attention, had I not turned a blind eye, had I intervened, how different things would be. And whenever I put together an episode of Cosmic Jar, it's very, very much influenced by the wonderful, vulnerable, and sometimes shocking conversations that I have with you all when you come for astrology readings, and especially the type of questions that roll in when there is more consistent and frequent tough astrological transits happening throughout the year. And I often think about, well, what's the difference between the people who do okay, they plod along even during the most difficult of transits, versus the people who basically energetically are like a fish out of water and just trying their best to catch their next breath. And one of the things I identified was nostalgia. The people who do very well during difficult times have very little moments where nostalgia can influence them and get to them. And for the people who have a rockier time, well, they are sitting in the lap of nostalgia and being puppeteered by it. So I thought, hey, let's do an episode unpacking why do we allow nostalgia to influence us the way it does, and just the way I tell you all to release yourselves from the grips of starboard spirituality. Perhaps by the end of this episode, you will be ready to let go of whatever Stockholm syndrome nostalgia has got you firmly placed in. Don't forget, one of the biggest things I have been talking about is 2024 is a very powerful year. We are in the last glimmers of a rebirth cycle. The decisions you make in this year, bare minimum, will impact the next 2 decades of your life. And on a bigger scale, well, the decisions we make and have made in 2024 is going to heavily, very much influence many generations ahead of us. So you know the routine. Grab a cup of jar, get comfortable, let's have a cosmic chit chat. So let's begin by defining what is nostalgia. I think for imagination purposes, you could compare nostalgia to the most delicious, warming, comforted dessert on the coldest of winter nights, right? We can't help but indulge in every bite, feels even more satisfying than the last. But by the time you get down to licking the plate, taking up every last crumb that you can, all of a sudden, that same delicious sugary taste you were craving almost is sickly sweet. your jeans feel a bit too tight, you feel like you need to go for a long walk, get some fresh air, some hot water or beverage to wash away all that sickliness that's coating to your mouth. That's nostalgia, right? It's often this reflection of the past that we over romanticize. We have a deep affection for what has been when we are currently not enjoying our reality. It's really wistful. You know, back in the day, nostalgia was actually considered a medical condition. Can you imagine that? A sensation or phenomenon so overwhelming that it can impact your very well-being, completely hinder the way you conduct your day-to-day activities. Nostalgia is a very powerful experience and very rarely can be used for positive experiences, but in the everyday today, when we're going through it, nostalgia is very much our favorite dessert that's been laced with poison. But we can't help ourselves. We don't question why all of a sudden this dessert has appeared from nowhere. Who is even serving us this plate? Why all of a sudden am I craving this? We don't have that kind of critical feeling when nostalgia takes over. And nostalgia went from being this honestly like Victorian medical condition where doctors were very concerned about people. They would try to give them all kinds of, we'll say, substances to knock them back into reality. And in the modern day, look, psychologists very much acknowledge it as a huge phenomenon for people, right? Something that can deeply, deeply hinder and influence and play with people's emotional and mental well-being. So why is it something that is so potent, so able to very much rewire how we are behaving day to day? Why do we allow it to wrap us up even when we know it has the ability to completely wind us? So when you begin unpacking the more dark side of nostalgia, it becomes very interesting to see how it can really hinder people. Because the thing is, you're essentially looking at someone who is fixated on something that once was. And in that process, as you have conversations and you get them to unpick their feelings and their reflections, you know, it's very clear there has been a over-romanticization. It's very clear that sometimes this thing of reflection may not even have been their actual past. This thing for what once was, they simply couldn't even existed in that time, right? Or it's kind of obscure and they don't actually have that proximity and that closeness, that situation, that person, that environment, that dynamic, that possession that they thought they did, right? So it quickly becomes something, I think from a Vedic astrology point of view, where we see it as a mental prison for people, right? Even when you are having the most kinds of inspirational conversations with people and you're really letting them know that, look, your future is incredibly bright and there's all these wonderful things that are going to come and all these experiences that will like set your heart on fire, give you that feeling of, oh my God, like I have purpose, and really all those delicious things that we would all like to consistently feel, I think a little bit more regularly. Some people never get there because they are so much a prisoner of nostalgia, right? They can't leave that mindset. It's so hard for them and really overwhelming to even take one little footstep outside of their comfort zone. And if you take it deeper, there's just sometimes a stubbornness, and it feels like a belligerence when you're talking to people about even detaching from things that they know deep down are holding them back. So whilst initially, yes, nostalgia is like this warm, fuzzy feeling and it gives us a lot of comfort, the practicalities are it's poisonous. It really will not serve you. And all this time, all this energy, all these tears and sadness you give nostalgia, that's an energy exchange, right? That's your inspiration, your creativity, your problem solving, your personality, all these wonderful things that need to be more protected and cultivated by you, they go out the window. Everything is an exchange, right? Even when we talk about karmas, that's why with Vedic astrology we tend to be quite stern and somber about what your actions. You're made up of several different karmas and you are forever building and forever paying, so be more strategic. Again, when you reflect on nostalgia, it really feels like such a little problem maker. And over the years, when I have met individuals who are very much being held captive by nostalgia, I have identified 3 key things that cause nostalgia. So take a very deep sip of that cha, and hopefully none of this does apply to you, but if you find yourself applicable to one of the 3 points I'm about to make, get a grip, baby. Like, come on, we've been in a Saturn ruled year. You still haven't learned your lesson? Do not come crying to me asking for a reading. I can't help you if you don't want to help yourself, you know? So let's get into it, hibiscuses. The first consequence of someone being a victim of nostalgia tends to be they are not happy with their current reality, right? That's where all the rhetoric and the narrative of like, you know, back in the day, or it never used to be like this, or I just miss times when A, B, and C. And then you look at them and there's a few things that come to mind, right? Because let's face it, if you're not happy with your current reality, the first thing you have to accept and address what got you here. And there is no way that is practical nor logical for you to revert taking those steps back and going back to once was, because you will still repeat the same mistakes. You just don't like the consequences of where your steps or your missteps are taking you. Am I right? And also, what a disservice to yourself, right? Because let's look at it at a more positive note. The reality is, when we are not happy with our current reality, to some extent we feel powerless, right? There's often this idea of I was a little bit more free, I had more flexibility, I could be carefree, right? That's simply not the case, because whatever you feel like you've lost in that freedom, I would challenge you to also consider the skills, the strength, the wisdom, the beauty, all these other things that you have gained. And it's such a disrespect to yourself to crave a version of you from the past. And even if you could go back, do you feel like you would fit in? Right? I'm not just talking about clothes, makeup, people, and environment. Do you really think you would feel that good? You've grown, you've developed as a person. You are not going to be functioning at all in the same way that you were for a time that you were romanticizing. And this is not even applicable to those creeps who was like, I wish I existed in the 50s and 60s. I can tell you now, as a marginalized person, it is barely tolerable existing now when openly people are genociding, harming, and just exploiting, discriminating. Like, they're openly committing crimes, they're not blinking. You think I want to go back to a time where allegedly it was illegal for them to do this stuff and they still didn't care? It's illegal now, they're not changing. So again, when we talk about we're not happy with our current reality, it's not that the past is better. There is something not that great. And instead of avoiding the work, turning a blind eye, hoping even to hide it out, take action. Firstly, like I said, it begins by acknowledging what got you to this current reality. Number 2, what is actually in your control in this situation? You know, again, I think a lot of the times when people are not happy with their current reality, I would say like quite a high percent of that situation is dictated by things that are out of their control. They're just not happy to be there. But you can take yourself out of a situation, right? So then after you've identified what the power dynamics is, what kind of leverage do you have to change your current reality? Because I think we also have to be very realistic. You know, when people are nostalgic from the past, let's look at a couple of situations. When you're not happy with your current reality, you're thinking of people who may be stuck in, at that current moment in time, not the easiest relationships. It could be someone in a career roadblock, right? You feel stagnant. It could even be something as like, God damn, like, how did I end up looking like this, feeling like this? I don't recognize how we got here, right? The answer is not in the past. The answer is in the current moment. You cannot change what has been. If you could, there would be no need for karmas. There would literally be no need for like religion, philosophical outlooks in life. You would have this, but life, God, universe doesn't work that way. So let's deal, as I always say, with the nature of the beast versus hoping that we can tame it, impressive, give it sweet treats to work in our nature. As I always say, that's why a lot of you will have a lot of tears and misery over this manifestation bullshit. Doesn't work like that. It's a colonizer's mindset. So again, going back to you are not happy with your current reality, once you've done that reflection piece, and to your best of your ability, you have identified what you don't like about your current reality, what control you have of changing it, then you have to take the steps to make a difference. I often think about, you know, I think nostalgia to a certain extent is the same as of a fight or flight mode, right? And some people will use it to defend, shelter, self-preserve themselves, and it's understandable, right? I don't think you should be ashamed of being nostalgic. It definitely serves its purpose, as we'll explore a little bit later in our conversation. But you have to admit, when you are in its clutches, and it can affect you to the point that you can't get joy, pleasure from your day to day, and you cannot see hope nor inspirational change in your future, something has gone terribly wrong here. And we can always put it back to, you are not happy with your current reality. So instead of trying to water dead plants, instead of trying to give yourself kind of this false happiness, or like, you know, whatever the clutches of nostalgia is giving you that is hindering you from stopping you engaging with your current reality, unroot yourself. You know, when I go through the October horoscopes and then in November and December, a lot of the conversations we're having is about having the courage, the audacity, the confidence to unroot yourself from various patterns, various environments, various relationships, dynamics, so on and so forth, and pick a new ground. A ground in which you will flourish, a ground in which you feel stable and secure, and most importantly, where rot can't get to you. Which actually leads me to point number 2. Next cause that I find makes people become a victim of nostalgia: identity issues, right? Often people will feel very much out of sorts. They no longer recognize who they are. Remember what I said earlier? We don't recognize who we are. We have no idea how we ended up here. So then we feel a little bit scared, right? We feel intimidated. We feel out of our depths. We feel like we have very little control. So instead of perhaps doing, and it's not a daunting exercise, figuring out who you would like to be moving forward, we shut down. And then we start to again romanticize what has been. So again, I think many women and queer people can relate to this, but we often, you know, our bodies are so weaponized. I'm definitely guilty of this. You know, there's definitely times when I found pictures of me in my early 20s, right? Or when I very much were in the first like year of university, and I was such a different body type. But at the time, right, I'm looking back and I'm like, yeah, that's the birth of Carefree Brown Girl. Like, baddie, I love it. That's not the reality. Back in those times, those photos were being taken, right? I remember thinking, like, I hate my body. I can't believe, and like, I just remember like all this negativity that was housed in me. And it's so funny to me now because it's a double-edged sword. I think in one regard, I think younger me would be very much impressed by older me, but then older me looks at younger me, it's like, you're very cool, you are very much the unfiltered version of Carefree, and I love your audacity, I love your expression. I think, oh my god, right? But seldom in the moment is there appreciation, right? And again, when you are having identity issues and you think back to what was, and nostalgia kind of warps your perception, I think the easiest way to kind of dead that, or not allow nostalgia to have such a firm grip over your like confidence and your sense of value and belief and on all of the good stuff that you should have about yourself, is just be like, cool. When I look at me now, I'm clearly not in a space where this identity is working for me. Who am I trying to be in this next chapter? And I think the issue is with nostalgia, there's almost like a permanence, right? We have this idea that I think it completely forgets and eradicates the idea that life is ever changing. You know, a lot in Dharmic faiths and various Eastern philosophies, that I think it's like very early stages of like body positivity, or like that self-coach, self-help type of vibe, where people are told that this is just a temporary vessel. Your identity is one of thousands you will have in the cycle of reincarnation. So the job is not to cling to an identity, but really what we have to do is, one, take care of the vessel. So whatever identity we have, to the best of our abilities and our mind and the knowledge we have at the time on our hands, we are okay to navigate life and feel confident and empowered to deal with the maya, the illusions, to challenge the obstacles that are pretty much predestined for us to go for. And then the next thing is, you're ever changing. Everyone is multifaceted. You are not meant to be one thing. So when people start having identity issues, a lot of the time it is a self-inflicted pain. It's this idea that in this moment in time, I should be this person, A, B, and C, and it just like piles on, and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds, and you crush yourself. You are your biggest enemy. You are literally your biggest hater in those sessions, right? So again, the interlink between nostalgia and identity issues can be very easily resolved just by being kinder to yourself. And also, I think there's an element of thinking you should have had certain stuff figured out by now, right? That's a very real feeling. But, you know, I think it's kind of funny, again, from the point of Vedic astrology, because I often think about when I do readings for people, and the ones who have the most prosperous future, I think very abundant, it's always, again, it's a double-edged sword where they'll know, I think deep down they're meant to do more stuff and this is not the final form of them. And then the other aspect is that they will play themselves down. They won't really go for the jugular the way they should be going for the jugular. So then I sit there and I'm like, do you have any idea how good it is about to get? Do you understand your purpose in this reincarnation? You need to step up and own your identity. You shouldn't feel shy. Like, go for it, right? So I think there's just elements that, like, when you reach for the past, it's just, again, it's such a disrespect. If you are not, I think you should give yourself way more respect and dignity and value than to be nostalgic. Because as we unpack it, the causes for nostalgia are seemingly looking like low self-esteem, low confidence, not a lot of future or inspiration moving forward. You don't really have that value in yourself to think you could be. The future will not be as good as what has been. But when you think about what has been, it's not an honest reflection, is it? And then maybe perhaps you are just, for the people who float in between, right? They don't have too much extreme thoughts about them being this way or that way. Or perhaps you're just stuck in a rut, right? We all have chapters in life where we're stuck in a rut. Again, nostalgia is not the answer. Inspiration, playfulness, creativity is the answer. Like, you know, I often joke about Starbucks spirituality and how it scares people with astrology, especially when it comes to house placements, which is so weird to me, because often the house placements people think are positive really are the true motherfuckers, the stuff that will cripple you, and the ones that you will think are negative and like, I don't know, borderline demonic. The most wealthiest, happiest, prosperous people would actually double up and have stelliums in those houses, right? Myself included. So the one thing I do share about my chart, and there will be times in the future where we get into it, at this moment it's not appropriate, but I'm a mega super house 12th house stellium. My identity, I feel like personally I've had several rebirths and deaths in my lifetime thus far, right? And now I'm in a state where I don't know, nostalgia can't really get me, because I always think about the future is always way more delicious, and I have appreciation for the past because it has took me to A, B, and C, or giving me a wisdom, but it's ran its course. And again, if you go back to this idea that you can't water dead flowers, and maybe this is the Punjabi Jat in me, I am more excited and fixated and passionate about growing an abundant garden than trying to find one seed that I planted like 5 moons ago, and I'm like, where is that magic beanstalk tree that I was promised? Like, no, like I will take matters into my own hand. And also the religious aspect, right? For me, again, I think the default is I'm a Vedic astrologer. I have a very strong sense of like faith. Like, I'm obviously like quite religious in my own fun girly pop way. But for me, like nostalgic, so I don't come from an Abrahamic faith. I don't really believe in like a shaitan and God and that dynamic so much. I think those are things that exist inside of us and we have to learn to balance them. But like if you want to talk about demonic and devil-like, is that not nostalgia? Only something that devil-like could make you be so wrapped up in illusion, so sad, in like so feeling so unworthy in yourself that it stops you from prospering, it stops you from seeing the good, it stops you from seeing your value, cultivating all the things in you that need to be kept alive so all this goodness can come. So again, when we talk about the causes of nostalgia, I think it's huge identity issues. You no longer know who you are, you don't really have a sense of where you want to go, and I suppose instead of doing the work or being open to experiment or even sitting down with yourself to like, it must be scary and intimidating is the only thing I can think about, right? When nostalgia is able to impact your identity, you really must be very, very scared. And the saddest thing is, it is a self-imposed, it is a self-imposed demon, and only you will be able to exercise it out. But you've got to be willing to do that. And perhaps on the final note, before we move on to the third cause, I think this is a thing to point out, especially during a Saturn ruled year. Do not allow others to cling to a nostalgia about you and keep you in a form of identity. So again, I read for quite well-known public figures, and I think the funny thing for me has always been them growing as a person, but people having such a deep attachment to an idea, a persona or what was of them in the past. They're not really given the same, I think, kindness, grace and flexibility we have to like pop up as a new person, right? There's so much harsher narrative and criticism, and again, none of it matters. Like, who the F are you? Again, side note, literally kicked in. I am so excited for the death of celebrity culture, how we know it, because the fans who enable it are going down with it. And I'm like, me and my 12th house stellium love to see this, because what do you mean you perceive me, and what in the name of parasocial relationship connection do you think is going on here? Because if we were close, trust me, you would feel that connection with me, but we're not. So shut the fuck up. No one cares what you think, Wait, I lost my point. Where was I going? Oh, people. But essentially, that in itself is awful. Don't don't allow people to hold you back, right? Think about how much, and I think about this a lot from the frame of like brown kids in different marginalized communities, right? How often children, and then when they're going through the phase of being a young adult and then growing into adulthood, how many of them are hindered and held back by kind of conversation and off-the-cuff comments of like, you know, when you were younger, you were such a good person, or da-na-na-na-na. And I'm like, how dare you, right? Like, what the hell? And don't forget, when people are nostalgic for a certain version of you, I am willing to bet you £500 per dynamic. I'm not a gambling girly, but watching on my mouth like I am. It's because they had more power over you. There was something about you in that moment that was more digestible for them, easier to control, right? God forbid you made them feel better about being a spiritual scab, an ill-dressed bitch, you know? It's all interconnected, and be very careful, because again, are you starting to see it? Nostalgia is a thing that will kill you in your future. And to allow nostalgia to stop you blossoming, especially in a time where astrologically, you know, we're in a time where it's very much about a lotus blossoming through very muddy waters finally, right? Don't do it, hibiscuses. Don't fall for the same patterns of behavior. Don't allow the past to blur how good your future is. That's the stuff that holds you back. That's the stuff that will, I think, deeply influence you to make very regrettable decisions that equal negative karmas. Now let's move on to our third point. I'm sure you probably already connected the dots, but the third little demon in our terrors when it comes to being a victim of nostalgia is people are scared of the changes that are occurring in their life. Think about the first two things that we've identified. Number one, you're not happy with your current reality. So obviously something is going on that is not easy for you. Number two, identity issues. Again, when we feel out of sorts about ourselves and who we are, something is happening in the environment and the dynamics around us that we are not easily coping with. So the third one, and maybe perhaps the biggest one that underpins it all, changes are occurring. We are scared. We want to, it very much is. It's better the devil we know than the devil we don't. Which to me is stupid, because why are you trying to know the devil at all? Like, this is what I don't get. I'm like, free yourselves. Whilst suffering makes you richer and stronger and wiser, there has to be like some level of boundary setting and not being the own victim of your stupidity. Like, well, you are not born to suffer to that extent too, right? You have to fundamentally believe in good things are happening and are for you, and someone has that in your interest, aka God. If not, I'm a big believer of life is very, very long, and it can feel longer or it's more difficulter should you make missteps and have a very questionable outlook. You know, it won't be very easy nor comfortable or that much graceful for your existence. But let's go back to it. The third cause of nostalgia is changes are occurring and you are fundamentally not comfortable about what is happening in your life. So again, let's look at a few situations. Perhaps it's a case of your career is changing, right? New industry, new role, new status. Perhaps family dynamics are changing. You know, I'm of a particular age where, babies are on my brain. And I don't know how I feel about parenthood, right? Again, I've grown up as carefree brown girl. I want to preserve that. I will evolve carefree. You know, that is very much, I feel like, my soul's essence. Creepy fact, my moon sign rarely changes in any of my 20 birth charts. The essence of this one is strong, honey, but you know, I think for anyone or any partner that's building a family and stuff, for both parties, it's very intimidating. You have your own kind of moments about parenthood in a family unit, you know. We again become victims of nostalgia. We sometimes can think like we don't no longer live in a world where I can raise my kid in the same environment that I feel contributed to a lot of the positive traits that I have, or Christ, the world is so different now, like I don't know how to navigate any of this, right? And then outside of that, again, maybe it's bodies, it's locations. It's very easy to be scared of change if you feel like things are not working in your favor or truly right for you. And we can unpack that a few ways, right? So number one, let's just again go back to control. There are things you can control and there are things that you simply cannot. And to force the things you cannot will only cause misery. So instead of beating yourself up and again clinging to something that, as we have discussed, feels more obscure, more illusionary, not very realistic or honest reflection, that's such a disservice to yourself. That's such a disrespect to your time, your energy, and the things that are made for you. Pack it in, dummy. So you have that, right? And then to the things you can control, well, hibiscus is a case of courage, timing, and tact. You know, again, I think nostalgia is a tap out, right? Sometimes, and it's understandable, sometimes to get through changes that, whether they were planned or not, nostalgia can be that comfort blanket, right? That it's like, it's okay, like, no. But there is no good from the past coming into your present, and it has very much no business in your future, right? Because again, when I think people get scared of the changes that are occurring in their life, when I reflect on the astrology readings I do for people, and when you are having catch-ups about how have things unfolded, where are you at now, and this is your transit, again, in the most kindest way possible, I think the ones who often end up in sticky situations and stuck in very repetitive cycles, and they're not understanding why prosperous times have come and the fruits are not there, is because at every stop you've tried to recreate the past into your present or future, and everything is an energy exchange. So once again, whilst we can appreciate our past, we can definitely give respect to our homage, our heritage, and our past. The past is the past. It will not make changes easier. Perhaps there is a certain wisdom in the past that can help you deal with changes, but you have no business clinging onto it, nor trying to use it as a shield to block you from dealing with changes and all of that jazz. So yeah, when you kind of look at the dark side of nostalgia, I think it's pretty fair to say hibiscus is. It would seem like a secret killer, you know, kind of like cigarettes before we found out how horrible they were for our health. Which reminds me, right, it's a Saturn ruled year. I'm very much into Vedic numerology, so let me give you 8 examples of public figures who have very seemingly clinged on to nostalgia, and it has got them into very sticky circumstances, which again could have been very easy avoidable had they took control of their mindset and dealt with the reality that's in front of them and the nature of the beast that they are contending with, versus, you know, clinging on to their comfort blankie of nostalgia. So let's get into it. So, obviously it's a Saturn ruled year. Saturn has been doing what Saturn intends to do, which is to strip away all illusions that hold us back from fulfilling our destiny or being in the next chapter we were destined to be in. So the first figure I wanted to explore with you, where nostalgia has very much been a weapon and not a friend, is Kanye. So I'm a huge Kanye fan, very regrettably in current times, right? And one of the things that immediately came up to me is like all the bars he has about, I miss the old Kanye, Kanye, right? Even us as fans, you know, undeniably Kanye has said and done some horrible things, and all away from the current conspiracy theories around P. Diddy, it does not detract from his own actions and the accountability that is needed for him to take, which I don't really think he will, right? But when you think about Kanye's own nostalgia over who he used to be, you can interconnect it very easily for the moments where he's gone on to do, I think, erratic stuff. It has definitely fueled him when he's having like mental health crises. It has not brought out, I think, his most charming and admirable side. Nostalgia, understandably for him, is really much associated to this particular, I think, freedom of identity and creativity he once had. And instead of, again, perhaps dealing with his current circumstances, he uses it as a weapon to allow him to then go and exhibit this freedom and just be like, you know, this is what, like, this is who I really am. This is like, this is old me. This is a true me. And it's like, that is not an excuse to start wiling out and doing hurtful things, not only to others around you, but to yourself. Like, nostalgia for him is a real sickness. Again, all I can think about is at the beginning of this episode when I was like, guys, did you know nostalgia actually used to be considered a medical condition, and in modern medicine it's a psychological phenomenon? We understand why, right? But again, in Kanye, you see the identity issue jump out. Now, number 2 is a bit weird, but I was like, this is an immediate conversation. So let's talk about my favorite weirdo. And again, I think I'm probably going to regret saying that down the line, but Nicolas Cage. So Nicolas is very much an actor, and he comes from like a really big like movie type of family. I think his uncle was like the director of Godfather, the trilogy. Hang tight, people who love mafia films. Me and you have so much in common. Hang tight, my Patreon community who basically learned that I was like love mob vibes. But anyway, back to our conversation. He essentially loves like old school cinema. I'm talking like the 40s, 50s, like very much like it's his love, right? So he is nostalgic for what was, right? He's very much like group number 1. The issue is his nostalgia was actually very costly. So there was a few headlines, and it's been a while, where basically Mr. Cage went rogue collecting like movie artifacts, right? And even himself, I think he's poured a considerable amount of finances into trying to craft films that capture a certain moment in time and experiences we associate to cinema. But long story short, Brock, his nostalgia literally financially cost him. I'm here talking to you about emotions, energy, time, finances, dummy. Hibiscuses, come on. This is fundamentally at heart also a girly pop page. You cannot be spiritually stable and financially broke. They are please do not fall for this rhetoric that like you have to denounce life and material things. You have 4 life paths, right? There is your desires, there is your resources and your finances, there is moksha, liberation, then there are your duties. We must fulfill all 4 of them. One is a little bit more dominant in each of us, but finances serve its place. So again, when you talk about the dark side of nostalgia, whilst a little bit is slightly comedic, this man's nostalgia deeply impacted his financial situation, and he can't afford to. He has child support, he has multiple ex-wives. Even if you come from a wealthy family, finances are finances. Eventually the money runs out, right? The third example I very much was thinking about was Madonna. So I think with Madonna, right, again, we see the identity come up with her. And maybe, you know, this is a thing for people who have a admired or famed identity at one point. Maybe it's hard to evolve, right? And it feels very much, this is me at my most prosperous and abundant. I'm scared to leave it, right? Because I don't know if they'll like me. I don't know if A, B, and C will go down so much. And you must. You are never one thing. You don't stay one state. You must evolve. Go with it, even when you don't understand it, right? But when I was thinking about Madonna and her nostalgia, the thing that came to mind, I think it would be fair to say, I think sometimes Madonna is very nostalgic for her youth or a particular version of her womanhood, if that's fairer, right? And again, we know Madonna for her fitness, her well-being, undeniable. She's kept great condition. I don't think anyone could be in their, I think her 60s by now, with buttocks that firm in A, B, and C, but the hands will always betray you, bestie. That's why you gotta moisturize. But yeah, essentially, when you think of Madonna, right, we very much do associate her. My mum owned her infamous coffee book table. The girlies and gays who get it. The ones who don't, ew, why are you not up to date with pop culture, hun? But, you know, she very much is attached to what I think is like 80s, 90s, and the very early 2000 versions of her Madonna identity, right? And understandably so. It's iconic, it's influential, and I think to a certain extent it captivates like a raw side of her creativity and her personality. But you evolve, and it's funny to me because we often joke about Madonna's had several identities, but when you reflect on her currently, I think it's fair to say her nostalgia for that perhaps more expressive, most likely very sexualized version, and where she was maybe, I think she still is lusted over, I mean, someone is always somebody's cup of tea, but you know, her nostalgia for that particular state of her womanhood has got her into certain situations which are not so flattering and admirable, right? And it's because I think she would probably address she's an icon and she has that status and she deserves that status. But I think instead of easing into it, sometimes it could be perceived she's trying to compete with the same people who are fighting to earn their stripes. So therefore she does stuff where it's like, that doesn't really align with your identity, or that seems beneath you. So why would you do that, right? And again, I don't know if anybody remembers the time that she gave Drake a lap dance at a concert, and it was just a whole thing. And in my head when I was thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, she performed like she was Madonna, and she threw that thing down like it was the 80s and 90s, and it was Madonna. It's Madonna, damn it. But the issue is, for the girlies and the gays, we will always see you as Madonna, you know? And we perhaps are a little bit more forgiving about if you would like to stick with that identity, right? Does not mean the rest of the world is. There are fresh eyes on you. So again, when you think about nostalgia leading you astray, perhaps nostalgia could literally lead you into circumstances and situations and decisions that are actually highly embarrassing for you. And it's because you are not dealing with the reality of who you are. For whatever reasons, you're not up for evolving. It's kind of like, and I also think there's different conversations we have to have about sexism, ageism, gender, all of that, right? Because this is from a very superficial point of view, because I think it's interesting how she is more heavily criticized and perceived as embarrassing for clinging on to one version of her womanhood, but yet you all are out here allowing Leonardo DiCaprio to carry on like he's still a 90s heartthrob. It's like, sir, you are, I think he's actually in his 50s now. I'm like, you cannot be in that club with those young things. No, sir, like you're basically Jack Nicholson to the Huns now. Like, grow up. You don't have to be married, but sir, you can't be here. Now let's look at the next public figures. If you didn't get it by now, I'm going to go through 8 public figures because it's a Saturn ruled year. Number 8, Vedic numerology, y'all. But anyway, the next person I thought about was actually Prince Harry, because I think he brings alive the point about how changing of circumstances or changes that occur that are not very comfortable for us can fuel nostalgia and again, perhaps get us to behave or make decisions that when we look back wasn't the smoothest of ways to deal with something. So, you know, Prince Harry obviously has gone through a very public changing of a lifestyle, right? And I think it's difficult because, again, you're dealing with, firstly, a person who was a child when they lost their mother, right? So many things change, so many levels of comfort and security are taken away from you. So therefore, it makes you very attached to a particular time in your life, right? Which is beautiful, because there will always be an admiration, a special place in someone's heart. That's the positive side. But I think when you haven't processed certain stuff, when current situations and changes begin unfolding in your life, it can almost be something like PTSD, traumatic. A lot of anxiety can happen because that thing in the past, again, nostalgia, makes you feel like it's unfolding here in this moment, right? And it has implications, and it can maybe make you a bit more pedantic, and even when your concerns are so justified, it doesn't really make you the most strategic head. So even when you are trying to problem solve and handle certain stuff, you actually might be a little bit of a disservice to yourself, because again, nostalgia is eating you up, but you're not handling things in the most smoothest, sharpest and graceful of ways, and it trips you up somehow, some way. And again, you know, I never like the conversations where people are like, oh, he's just hungry for like his pre-royal life where he was like Harry the Lad. I'm like, that is absolutely not the case. Like, he has openly said he is growing up. He has learned so much about the world that he wasn't exposed to before. He has no appetite or need to go back to that. For him, like, he's also a good example of nostalgia, because he sits there and he's like, no, actually, yeah, perhaps maybe when I was in my bubble, it may have been more fun, but it wasn't healthy. I don't feel positive about the contribution I was making, or perhaps things I was passively enabling. I'm okay with change, but even then, nostalgia has its ugly cores and it can play out. So again, I don't think he gets enough sympathy for the situation and the environment he saw his mother in, and then to see your wife go through it, bewildering. So there is some, I think, murkier waters when it comes to nostalgia. Now, the next person I wanted to look at was Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, in 2025, I'm absolutely flooding you with like all my like pop references, arts, culture, give you an education on what it's like to be a Y2K babe. But anyway, so Quentin Tarantino is a bit of a weird one, because when I was younger, I definitely went through a douchebag Tumblr era. I was a media student at some point in my life. But yeah, I definitely went through a time frame where I was like the biggest Tarantino like cinema fangirly, and now I look back, I'm like, these depictions are actually awful, and this must have been like some form of internalized racism. But Quentin is kind of well known for being very nostalgic for certain points in time. The issue is, it's probably not in the same way Nicolas Cage is, where you can maybe find some endearing aspect to it. No, Quentin is very much like, I don't get why we talk about like race, sexism, class in this way. Like, don't you remember back in the day where, and he's one of those. And it shows in his movies. So the thing is, the time frame when you think of Quentin, you're very much thinking of like 90s indies cult classics, right? The 90s were not a fabulous time for gender representation. Even Salma Hayek talks about like when she first came to Hollywood, all people wanted to do was offer her like very hypersexualized Latina roles. And she was like, I'm a storyteller, I'm a brilliant producer, I want to tell meaningful, different Latino community stories out here. And she had to fight tooth and nail to have freedom made, right? And then Quentin obviously had her in Dawn Till Dusk in the tiniest, and she had the exact body yardie for this, so again, eternal slay. But yeah, he definitely played into her being a like siren vixen Latina woman, and again, hot, but there's a lot of his films that are not aging well, right? And he, instead of having meaningful conversations or reflections or observations on it, this man doubles down. And now it's got to the point where, oh my god, it's again the same creepy vibe of like, really, dude, like, you couldn't evolve. And the thing is, where he once was kind of famed for like almost this I dread to say intellectual, but he was definitely more respected when it comes to filmmaking. There are different generations of cinema goers, or even people who've evolved cinema lovers, that look at him and they're like, you're so childlike, you really miss the mark every time, like, he might be turning into like the Elon Musk of cinema a bit. So yeah, that's Quentin. So again, he prefers a time where he could behave and talk about and direct and show things in a certain way, and is failing to understand why people do not gel with that representation or that engagement and that creativity anymore. And instead of evolving, you know, widening his connection, he wants to double down, and it definitely has an impact on his films and his likability. Again, nostalgia is a costly little devil. The next person I had in mind was actually a few Bollywood people. So let's talk about a Bollywood actor known as Govinda. So Govinda was a huge comedic actor in 90s Bollywood, right? Very much famed. Like, you could find him in every other Bollywood film, right? A real darling. However, just like Quentin, and you're going to find this in the next examples that we go through, times change, right? So this is really like unsettling to say, but in a lot of like the 90s Bollywood films that I grew up with, so my mum's like a proper cinephile, like she loves films, she did two really good things. So number one, there was a lot of comedy that was centered around the normalization of domestic abuse in India and within like the brown culture throughout South Asia, right? This is obviously not cool, but at the time people were like, I don't know, I think it's like a whole shtick, and it's like I have no idea how they justify it, but it very much was dominant. There's films about domestic violence and they've turned it into like a cute story about a daughter-in-law like trying to find her place in a household, and it's like, no, this is all like emotional, financial, mental, physical abuse. The fuck? But we can say that with hindsight and a different culture and a different lens, right? So my mum would always point out to me that's not funny, is what I'm trying to say. Even though she's a deep cinema lover, she's like, absolutely not. And there's one film she actually showed me, I can't remember the name of it, but Rani Mukherjee plays like a primary school teacher who is intimately harmed, and it's really like groundbreaking cinema for 90s Bollywood, because it literally talks about like the justice process, like protecting her respectability, like flipping it so like the attacker's actually seen as someone who is, it's like fascinating. So like, hang tight, Mandy always put me onto the good and keeping her daughter in check. But sorry, the point was the audiences are changing, perspectives on social topics is greatly evolving. Govinda can't seem to fall in line with what the new funny is and what it is not. And it's not that he even gets aged out. Like, I think Govinda would have had a really prosperous like Bollywood career date even now, but for whatever reason he doesn't want to get with the times. And his kind of, same as Quentin's, their kind of attachment and stubbornness to this nostalgic thing of like, but people always used to find it funny, we're too sensitive now, A, B and C. It has a financial cost. And then for Govinda, I don't think it makes him fall from graces as much as other people, but yeah, I think there's definitely an interlink between like the relevance and him getting roles in, we'll say, new era Bollywood versus like then. And staying on the Bollywood theme, the next person I want to talk about was Amir Khan, right? So Amir Khan is one of my favorite, not just like Bollywood actors, but directors, producers, writers. He's so gifted at cinema, right? But again, Amir is a perfect example where his nostalgia is very much associated to a certain time frame, right? So that means he's not very, it was harder for him to embrace the changes in terms of Indian cinema goers' appetite for what they want to see on the screens, the style of storytelling, even the whole conversation, because cinema is still very big and dominant in India, but streaming's obviously, it's more accessible in India. So there's this clash happening now, and India, and I think the whole South Asian film industry trying to find out its new dynamic with it, right? But the point I want to make here is Amir is very nostalgic for like perfection in cinema, right? Like the most beautiful of surroundings, the most emotionally provocative storytelling. Like it is a real craft, and he is a true artist. but he is a little bit notorious for being too much of a perfectionist. And people who work with me for a long time with Vedic Astrology know I'm notorious for yelling at people. Like, get it the fuck done and you will perfect it over time. Don't be held back, because perfection, or maybe that should be the next one. Let's talk about perfection, nostalgia, perfection. I'll come up with like my own version of like the 7 deadly sins. Love that for me. Anyway, but very much this attachment he had to know things must always be done this way, and not acknowledging like the new style, the new tools, and dealing with the reality of what's in front of him had a huge impact of his films. I still love all of his films. Like, I am truly not an Amir Khan hater. It's simply not in my DNA. But, you know, for critics and perhaps the younger generations of cinema goers when it comes to like South Asian films and so forth, films felt a little bit stale. People were frustrated with like these long time frames to put these films out, and then when they would come out for those audiences where they were asked for all this patience, they were asked for all this appreciation, it just didn't land. And again, that is him being a victim of a nostalgia and attachment to the past, right? And again, thinking people are navigating from the same space as him when it comes to the experiences he's creating. And then finally, but not leastly, Karan Johar. You are going to understand, I am a Bollywood lady. So, Karan Johar is one of the most celebrated Bollywood directors, and for really good reason. Give that man all the flowers, right? I'm not a Karan Johar hater either, unless, like, God forbid, stuff comes out where I'm going to have to be like, oh great, you also are going to become on my art detoxics, because I simply cannot join art knowing people will harm whilst making this. But Karan really is a huge contributor as to why Bollywood became like a soft power, the same way you see like stuff with South Korea and its art now. In the early 90s and 2000s, that was his films that were making global impact. That was his characters. So like Kabhi Kushi Kabhi Gum, Kal Ho Na Ho, like it's all of these films that, like, when you think of Bollywood, even to this day, they come to mind, right? Now, nostalgia also got going. So his style of storytelling, for me, I still love it. They can never make me hate you. I watch, was it Rocky or Rani Prem Kahani like 6 times. I'll watch it more. I love it, right? But essentially, times move, things change, and perhaps his versions of like romantic comedies and certain character dynamics, they don't gel very well with people now. And you've had some, I think it's unfair criticism, because I'm like, sometimes cinema is just meant to be feel good, and this scratches, like, he is my version of like Princess Diaries when it comes to Bollywood films. You just need that itch scratch, and the man is, and even, oh my god, but either way, I'm the wrong person to probably do the hater video for this. But essentially, when he's gone on to make newer films that reflect current times, people feel like sometimes his portrayals of certain social issues is very like superficial. It might minimize certain things. It might almost feel like a caricature, and it's because he's so hell-bent on like this 90s styles of rom-com or this idea of love and relationships, and people feel like it does not capture the nuances or the biggest uncomfortabilities of reality. And then for nostalgia, for him, he took a couple of financial hits, but I think it's more of a reputation hit. So remember what I said, nostalgia can sometimes put us into predicaments where we are not perceived in the best light. And you know, as I reflect on the 8 characters that we've gone through, I feel like nostalgia, it can really mess you up. It can stop you from evolving your identity, which again could be connected to future blessings. It can definitely mess up your finances because it gets you to make decisions that are not smart, nor strategic, nor serving. And I think thirdly, when I reflect on 8 characters that we've talked about, there's this kind of undeniable underpinning of like low self-esteem, truly, because to be scared of change, to cling to circumstances, to double down so much on something that feels very trivial, you must not really think very highly of yourself or think you would be valued or appreciated in different spaces and times. And so you stick to your comfort blanket, which is understandable, but I don't think it's the healthiest. So as we begin to close out Cosmic Jai, I wanted to take you through a couple of different religions' perspective on nostalgia, because again, I think you can see an interlink between the balance we should have when it comes to nostalgia versus when it becomes too heavy and really weighs us down in terrible ways. Sip a little deeper on that jar, hibiscuses. Let's get into one of the final part. Hold on now, hibiscuses. So I just had the most sensational brainwave. After reflecting on the 8 public figures we've just gone through, I realized from a Vedic astrology point of view, all of them share really similar astrological placements. So I think this might be helpful for people who really struggle with nostalgia. So from my point of view as a Vedic astrologer, when you are looking at people who might become kind of their worst own enemy, or to help people navigate their own pitfalls, 2 charts that are really important is number 1, the Rasi chart. That's like your cosmic blueprint. It gives a very detailed understanding of the things that you need to grow out of in order to prosper moving forward. And the second chart is the chart of emotional happiness, right? Now, there are a few nakshatras that were very dominant in both of these charts for all 8 individuals. So the first sign that came up a lot was Ashlesha. So if you're new around here, Ashlesha is Cancer type 6 to 9, right? And the immediate thought that I had was Ashlesha is known as the clinging star. There's a lot of karmas for people who have any Ashlesha in their chart, because it talks about whatever house or planets associated to, there needs to be a very intense psychological development for the person to be freed of staying in cycles that really have kept the soul in a very regrettable state. Also, the idea of being the clinging star, to not be the emotional punch bag for people, right? Ashleshas have to get comfortable with changes, accountability. They suffer a lot from the 3 causes that I was actually talking to you about. So I think it was fascinating that all 8 figures at some point capture Ashlesha in one of their 20 birth charts, right? The second one that was dominant was Rohini, right? One of the most auspicious nakshatras. So Rohini is Taurus type 4 to 7. Rohini is known as the red one in English. So there's a little bit of a catch here. So whilst Rohini is quite respected and famed, and a lot of people hope to find Rohini in their birth charts, the red one is a test, right? Rohini's power is the power to grow. So you, to a certain extent, will fulfill your desires. But the red one talks about learning to control your emotions. What are the quality of the desires, right? And when Rohini it's a double-edged sword with Rohini. For as delicious and auspicious it can be, it can create a lot of ruckus, and a lot of ruckus that people can't come back from, you know? But the same thing is, should you double down so much on fulfilling whatever desire or thing that you're aspiring to have, and you're unable to balance yourself, you will put yourself into a state that's deeply regrettable, embarrassing, and you will know the true consequences of this overindulgent state. And again, nostalgia, like I described at the beginning of this video, is often like a dessert. We just, you can't quite tell when the stomach is full, because every bite feels so delicious, so warm and so comforting, and then finally by the last bite you realize, this was not a smart decision. The third nakshatra after that, again very fascinating, was Chitra. Now Chitra is a nakshatra that spans between Virgo and Libra. Chitra is ruled by the divine architect. There's a distinct lesson here in terms of learning how to accept accountability in a person being the co-creator of their experiences, of their realities. You are responsible for that mental palace or prison that you are building with your actions, with your perceptions. Again, Chitra is known as the brilliant one. What's really interesting is all these nakshatras are so heavily associated to like quite a high status, a strong standing, a real like admiration or fixation people have on them. But it's really funny how they all tend to show a higher probability of becoming a victim of their own behavior. and embarrassing themselves ultimately. But Jupiter is known as a brilliant one. It's often symbolized by a pearl, but the trick here is to not allow pretty Maya to encase you, but to have the audacity, the courage, the wisdom, the groundedness to break through the pearl, so the soul's true essence can come out. Again, nostalgia can stop you from evolving and really being yourself to a certain extent. And then I think the last nakshatra that I felt was quite dominant in all 8 figures was Bhuvabhadra. And again, Bhuvabhadra is a nakshatra that spans between Aquarius and Pisces. But Bhuvabhadra is often, symbolized by a man with 2 faces. So my initial feeling was, one of the understandings of Bhuvabhadra is this idea of looking into the past and longing for the future, and people have that dynamic play out in different ways. But I think there's a distinct lesson here for these individuals in terms of, if you are so busy looking into the past, your future will never come and you will be blinded. You will not see the opportunities, you will not see the good things, and you'll be so wrapped up in this I think very negative, uneasy feeling of the past that so much is stored and delayed, and certain karmas associated to it, right? And in Bhuvabhadras, we see a lot of low self-esteem in people. And then I think the other thing that really stood out to me was the 12th house placements, right? So again, 12th house honey. Yeah, I won't lie to you. I think definitely in my own past, there has been times where I have been like rabid, like hungry because of nostalgia, right? For people, places. And at the time, I honestly have done so much stupid stuff, or like, oh my god, like I look back now and it's funnier because of the Mahadashas that I were running where I'm like, oh, you idiot, and very much in the style of the planet that was dominating my life at that time. But yeah, I think until you get that balance right of an appreciation but not a lust from the past, you will always find yourself in very regrettable decisions. And also, it's very superficial, but I honestly think one of my mantras and like one of the firm beliefs I have is, soon as anything makes itself a part of my past, I simply won't touch it again. It's one of my biggest superstitions, because my fear is, and I've seen it for me, because again, I'm a super 12th house stellium, so I feel like there's karmas associated to this. The second I cling or try to strive towards the past in a negative way, I lose fortune. I am not prosperous. A lot of mess starts happening. I feel like I start looking ugly. I'll be real with you. I'm a little bit superficial myself. I feel like a mess happens. And I have had to train my brain and very much learn the hard way. The past is the past for a reason. Rani worked with God, not against him. And isn't it really, really funny when I became detached and I worked with the stellium in my 12th house instead of forcing things, and I embraced the spirituality that was written for me in A, B, and C? How merciful. And I think God is always merciful, because again, imagine working with a dummy like me who's so stubborn and having the patience to teach me again and again and again. But yeah, no duh, life's good. Don't evil eye me. Don't even try that shit with me. I'm really on a new bag that any ill intentions, any evil eye, I'll curse you. I don't even have those powers, but just know it will go back to you 100-fold, and on your descendants, even on your pets. That's how deep this shit runs with me now. You will not scare me into like minimizing myself and hiding all this shine that God has given me. A mess. But again, I learned that because I was a victim of nostalgia. Bada boom, bada bing, became 12th house native. And again, I think 12th house is when people are nostalgic, they'll isolate themselves. And it's really ironic because the people, maybe minus Prince Harry, I think, but like a lot of the people were artists, right? Oh, maybe this is something for us to explore on Patreon. I have a lot of stuff that I want to like talk and educate about. But now we will move on to the religious part. Sorry, Hibiscus. It was like a complete brainwave. I was like, I should probably share this with the babes. But anyway, moving on. On this continuous journey of studying different religious scriptures, one of the thoughts I had whilst recording this podcast was, it's almost comical how all religions, regardless if they're Dharmic or Abrahamic, will try their best to steer people away from a state of nostalgia, or very much limit how nostalgia should be used. And I just think it's so fitting when we've gone through this conversation of why nostalgia is probably not the comfort blanket you should be clinging on to, and it's very much time to stop using your dummy, right? So the first religion that really jumped out to me was through the lens of like Hindu philosophies. You know, when you look at the conversations around nostalgia and the place it has, Hindus are very cynical when it comes to nostalgia, because we are so fixated on time, and time is made up of different periods and cycles. So when the soul or the person becomes so fixated in only existing or clinging on to one state of time, it's foolish. It's not going to serve you. It will only bring you probably a lot of grief, a lot of friction. And I think more concerningly, it's an indication that the soul is not ready to evolve. You're not actually ready to engage with whatever karmas you've built or are building. So hence this weird attachment. And again, from the Hindu lens, away from this cynicism of time and stuff, life is ever changing. This is the nature of life and existence. So again, to be so stubborn, to put all your eggs in this one basket, it's going to keep you a victim of Maya and illusions. And again, it will only be you that loses out. But it's fine. We can go around this cycle until you learn, but you will be stuck on a certain level until you get past that, right? Which actually leads me to maybe let's discuss Taoism, right? So my understanding of Taoism is when someone is nostalgic, they think it's an imbalance in the person, which makes me again chuckle a little bit, because we know for Western medicine at one point they saw it as a medical condition, right? They're like, oh no, this person is ill. But the same goes for Taoism. They're very much like, oh, when you are so stubborn and fixated to something that no longer exists or has been, and on top of that you are not perceiving something correctly, or there's a lot of conditions and remixes to your perception, you're imbalanced internally. And we need to sort out this imbalance, because if we don't sort out this imbalance, it's going to cause you to make a series of regretful decisions. So it's not even going to just hinder, we say, your spiritual journey. It's going to hinder your spiritual body. It's going to hinder your mental health, your relationships with people in life. They generally look at it like you are ill. There is a deep imbalance going on here, which links me to Buddhism. So in Buddhism, when they look at nostalgia, for them it's a lesson on impermanence, right? There's no need to be nostalgic. Again, there is a very strong rhetoric in Dharmic faiths and like Eastern philosophies in the world where it's like, don't touch this stuff. What are you doing? Like, this is not the one, right? But again, when we look at it through a Buddhist lens, for them, the nature of existence is impermanence. The biggest lesson is learning everything is temporary, right? So do not have these attachments. Don't become so fixated, because you will only make yourself ill. And really, I think, again, this goes back to my point that I say in most of my videos: deal with the nature of the beast, not these assumptions or these kind of negotiations. The beast is the beast. The animal is going to behave in the way that it's designed to behave. You cannot tame it. So it's better to know how it attacks, what it's hungry for, and deal with it in that regard than to like be upset. Almost like the story of the tiger who came to tea, but maybe a more gruesome modern update, right? But yeah, for them everything is impermanent. So to be nostalgic, there's no need. The same thing you are craving now, you will crave when the next thing changes. The next, you are just in this perpetual cycle of a very ill perception that is not fitting you. Then I think if you wanted to look at it a little bit differently, right? Because I think it's very clear that the Dharmic faiths, no, like, put this thing down, don't engage with it, it's beneath. If you start to ease into Abrahamic faiths, let's look at Sikhism, right? So obviously Sikhism is a Dharmic faith, but I think you can begin to see the trajectory of change. So I think what happens is, in a moment of time when human history has kind of more built out, I think they accept nostalgia is just, it's not, I don't think it's a normal part of human nature, but it's a very common weapon for people to pick up when they're not happy with reality, right? So then what they try to do is kind of like shape what nostalgia should be used for, and when it's not being used for this thing, naughty, right? So firstly, it's in the Sikh scriptures, nostalgia is actually portrayed as longing for union with God, like a return. But this is sweet though, because it's not a nostalgia where it's stuck in a moment of time. It's more of an indication that we are caught up in something that isn't our nature, or we have a lot of work to do here. So as we strip back the layers of Maya, we strip back from the ego, we strip back from attachments, that feeling that we have inside of us that there's something more out there and there's other places to go, it will lead us there, right? And again, from a religious point of view, for many religions, right, the point in existence is to, at some point in their own ways, is to go back to God, is to go back to source, right? So nostalgia can keep you grounded, right? That there's something more going on than here, right? And it's a soul's longing, because the soul has experienced God many times, right? We have had thousands and hundreds of identities and existences, but the soul knows God, it knows the postments, it knows its environment, A, B, and C. It wishes to return, you know? And then also, I think when you look at Sikhism, I think there's some interconnections between seva, which is one of worship and service, not just to God, but the wider community. You know, Sikhs are famed for seva. The Sikh Gurdwara is one of, I think, literally one of the only handfuls of religious institutions and places you could go to get a free meal all day, every day. And I think for a lot of practicing Sikhs, it's actually really interesting, because they don't pride themselves on how many times have they done prayers within a day, because again, Sikhs do multiple prayers in a day. They don't really pride themselves in how well they've remembered certain Gurbanis or chapters in the Guru Granth Sahib. They'll pride themselves on what charity have you done that day, what have you given, and not even in a prideful way, but they're like, that's things. But again, with nostalgia and seva, I think the interconnection there is, remember the tough times that you have been through. Think about the times that you would have appreciated a hand, right? That one of my favorite lines, I think it's from the Guru Granth Sahib, right? It's this line, and if you are lucky enough to go to Hamindasar, which is the Golden Temple, usually if you go in the early mornings, you'll hear this line a lot. But there's a particular line where, like, Babaji says, be careful, because your ship is still out to sea, rags to riches and riches to rags, right? I'm paraphrasing, but I think it's that, right? Remember the hardships you have endured, remember where you come from, remember all the roots, be of service, give back. So again, you can kind of see that, like, I think to some parts it's kind of funny, because I think a part of me is like, do you reckon Gurus were just like, these fuckers, just they're not gonna get them by themselves, let's just put in boundaries. You know, when you have a toddler, it's like, you can play, but like, play in the playpen. I think it's kind of like that. The final religion, maybe let's look at Islam, right? So I think when you look at Islam and nostalgia, the thing that jumps out to me, maybe a return to paradise, perhaps Jannah, right? This idea that and it's funny, because I think there's like an interconnection between like Dharmic faith and Abrahamic faith and stuff like that. But this idea that, look, your soul has existed a lot longer than this body that you find yourself in, right? There's a whole story being told outside of you. Do not get so wrapped up and attached to the dunya around you, because not just the goal, but the plan is, God wills it, you will return to paradise, you will come back to me, you will be here where you belong. So again, I think it's a little bit similar to the ideas that you have in Dharmic faiths, that like, you're going to return to source, or something that's a little like a different loka, and you're not going to stay in this perpetual style. So don't make yourself upset for something that is impermanent, right? And then maybe I can never remember the name of it. I think it's a term. I'll spell it. I think it's Fitirs, Fitirs. But I think it talks a lot about the natural state of the soul, right? And there's loads of hadiths on it too, where it talks about the journey is not actually to learn, but it's to unlearn, right? You are made in such a way that is wonderful. Do not ruin all this goodness and muck it up too much by getting attached to different things or placing value on things that, again, if it was there and it was meant to be willed by God, it would be, right? Don't mess up your own beauty. Don't mess up your own fortune and your abundance by clinging to like man-made things or going against like the nature of the soul. Like we have so perfectly described to you what it is, the journey there. Don't allow yourself to get upset by things that are simply a distraction, right? And yeah, there probably are hadiths where they've gone into like, I think a lot more like vibrant detail about like maybe how nostalgia probably could be weaponized against you and stuff. But yeah, hibiscuses, that was my little pep talk for you all. I figured the eclipse season has wiped us all out, but it's okay because we now know what toys not to play with. Now it's just a case of putting the toys down and finding a new playground to play in and not making the same mistakes. Other than that, I'm going to love you and leave you, and I hope you enjoyed this delicious episode of Cosmic Joy. Bye, hibiscuses.